Jacob Miles had always been a man of quiet rituals. Every morning, just before sunrise, he would rise from the creaky leather recliner in the corner of his modest living room, shuffle across the faded hardwood floor, and set a kettle on the stove. While it boiled, he would sit by the kitchen window, watching the morning fog roll across the sleepy streets of Eldergrove, Oregon. His coffee, always 2 sugars and a splash of cream, was less about taste and more about comfort. A symbol that life was still moving, that despite everything, he was still standing. Jacob had been a single father for 17 years. His wife, Clara, had died giving birth to their only child, Emma. That loss had hollowed something out of him, something he never quite got back. But in its place, Emma filled him, with meaning, with duty, with love so deep it frightened him at times. He didn't just raise her. He built his life around her.
Emma was bright.
Not just book-smart, though she was that too, straight A's, student government, top of her class, but emotionally intelligent in a way that made adults pause and reconsider their words. She had a gentle, introspective nature, more observer than participant in most social scenes. She loved quiet places, the town library, the little pond behind the church, and most of all, Maplewood Park, where she would sit under the tall sugar maples and sketch in her journal for hours.
Jacob adorait d'heure.
And perhaps without realizing it, he idolized her too. He never missed a parent-teacher meeting, never let a birthday go uncelebrated, never stopped reminding her of how much she meant to him. But over the years, those reminders had started to shift from warm encouragement to subtle expectations. Stanford's just within reach, kiddo.
You've got your mother's brun.
Don't waste them. You'll go further than I ever could. That's why I work so hard. It wasn't pressure, he told himself. It was belief. Faith in her. Emma rarely pushed back. She smiled, nodded, did what was asked. When Jacob looked at her, he saw a future brighter than anything he had known. He saw redemption. Legacy. The fulfillment of every sacrifice he had ever made. It was a Monday morning in late June, just weeks after her high school graduation. The house smelled faintly of toast and shampoo, and the light from the kitchen window slanted across the table where Emma was spreading peanut butter onto toast, her dark hair still damp, skin pale in that luminous, youthful way. "I'll be at the park for a few hours," she said without looking up. "Going over econ notes. I want to stay sharp before orientation starts." Jacob sipped his coffee, nodding with that mix of pride and fatigue that had become his default expression.
Texte me if you need a read. Don't stay out too long.
That park gets real empty after lunch. Emma glanced at him with a soft smile. "I'll be back before dinner. Promise." She kissed him on the forehead, grabbed her backpack, and was gone. The door clicked shut, and Jacob stood there for a moment, mug in hand, feeling oddly uneasy. Not fear, exactly. Just something unsettled. A breath he hadn't quite exhaled. He brushed it off. By noon, he was elbow-deep in circuit boards at Langley's appliance repair. His hands moved with practiced ease, soldering a connection inside a busted coffee maker. The shop radio played old country tunes, and for a while, he forgot the unease. Until his phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaky. An older man, Mr. Herrera, who ran a hot dog cart near Maplewood Park. He knew Emma. Everyone in Eldergrove did.
"Monsieur Miles, it's your doctor."
She collapsed. "Ambulance is here.
You need to come."
Jacob didn't remember dropping the tools. He didn't remember the drive. He only remembered the moment he saw her, Emma, lying on the grass, her limbs unnaturally still, her lips a terrifying shade of blue. Paramedics hovered around her, voices clipped and focused, hands moving fast and sure.
Défibrillator.
Oxygen.
EKG.
None of it changed anything. At the hospital, in a room that smelled too clean, a doctor with kind eyes and a quiet voice told him she was gone. "Cardiac arrest," she said. "We did everything we could. I'm so sorry." Jacob didn't cry. He nodded. Signed something. Accepted a plastic bag with Emma's phone, her sketchbook, a granola bar still uneaten. He sat beside her body in the sterile stillness and held her hand, cold now, but still hers. He whispered nonsense. Memories. Promises. Please. She had promised to come home before dinner. He didn't go home that night. Instead, he sat in his truck outside the cemetery,
watching as the workers lowered her casket into the earth at Crescent Pines, the oldest part of town, where moss crept over weathered headstones and the air smelled like pine and forgotten stories. Susan, his younger sister, flew in from Portland. She tried to help, brought food, cleaned the kitchen, sat with him in silence. But Jacob couldn't shake the feeling. It didn't make sense. Emma was healthy. No heart condition.
No warning.
Nothing. She hadn't been sick. She hadn't been tired. She hadn't seemed off. But something inside him refused to believe this was the end. It wasn't denial. It wasn't grief, not entirely. It was instinct. The same gut feeling that had once made him snatch a toddler Emma back from the edge of a busy street without consciously realizing the danger. 3 days after the burial, Jacob walked into his garage workshop. He spent the night building something small, careful, precise. By morning, he had hidden a micro-camera inside a small bouquet of plastic lilies, Emma's favorite flower. The device streamed directly to his computer. Battery life, 72 hours. He adjusted the lens. Packed it carefully.
And drove back to Crescent Pines under the rising sun.
He told no one. Not even Susan. Standing over the fresh grave, he knelt and placed the bouquet near the headstone. "I just want to make sure," he murmured. "Just in case." He didn't know what he was looking for. He only knew that promises mattered. And she had promised to come home. Jacob hadn't slept in 3 days. He sat hunched over his desk, eyes bloodshot and unblinking as the dim glow of the computer screen flickered in front of him. The video feed from the micro-camera showed only darkness. Occasionally there were faint sounds, distant rustling, the low creak of shifting wood, and once what he thought might have been a thump. But there was no movement. No breath. No miracle. He told himself he didn't expect anything. He just wanted peace of mind. Closure. But it was a lie. Each hour he watched that grainy image of pitch blackness, Jacob was hoping for something impossible, for the screen to show her eyes fluttering open, for her voice to cut through the silence, for this all to be a cruel mistake that he could somehow undo. On the 4th night, just past 2 in the morning, something changed. At first, he thought it was a glitch.
Afin, rythmique noise.
He leaned in, adjusting the audio. It was soft. Inconsistent. But there. Breathing. Very faint, almost imperceptible, like a shallow inhale followed by a pause too long, then another breath. He froze. His heart pounded so violently it drowned out the sound from the speakers. He rewound the footage, isolated the audio, played it again. It wasn't wind. It wasn't static. It was unmistakably human. Jacob stood up so fast the chair toppled over behind him. He ran to the bedroom where Susan was sleeping, shaking her awake with trembling hands. "She's breathing," he said.
Suzanne, she's alive.
At first, Susan didn't understand. Her eyes were puffy with sleep, her voice groggy. But Jacob dragged her to the computer, replayed the footage. After several loops, she pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide.
"Jésus, Jacob," she whispered.
That's not possible." "She's alive," Jacob repeated, voice hoarse. "I don't know how, but she is." Susan paced the room. "What do we even do with this? I mean, if you're right, if she's alive in there," she stopped, swallowing hard. "We buried her, Jacob. It's been 4 days." Jacob didn't hesitate. "Then we dig." He called the cemetery office at sunrise. They weren't open yet. He didn't care.
Et left voicemail.
He called again and again. By noon, when no one responded, he grabbed a shovel from his garage and drove back to Crescent Pines.
Suzanne insisted on coming.
"If you're going to do something this insane, you're not doing it alone." The cemetery was quiet, the way only old cemeteries could be. The headstones leaned at strange angles, their names worn down by rain and time. The grave was fresh, the dirt still soft. Jacob didn't speak. He just started digging. At first, Susan stood back, arms crossed, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and fear. But after 20 minutes, she picked up a second shovel and joined him. It took over an hour. The sweat poured down Jacob's back, soaked his shirt. His hands blistered. His breath came ragged and shallow. But when his shovel finally hit the edge of the casket, something surged in his chest, hope, terror,
something too big to name. He jumped into the hole, brushing dirt from the lid, fingers trembling.
"Help me," he said.
Together, they pried the lid open.
The inside was dim.
The bouquet was still there, slightly shifted. Emma lay exactly as they had left her, hands folded, eyes closed, face peaceful. For a second, Jacob thought he'd made it all up.
But then Emma moved.
Not much, just a twitch of her fingers, a flicker under her closed eyelids.
But it was enough. Susan gasped. "Oh my God."
Jacob, she's. Emma's eyes flew open.
They were white. Not just bloodshot or unfocused, white.
No iris, no pupil.
Empty.
Her lips parted.
And then she spoke.
But the voice that came out wasn't Emma's.
"Why?" the voice rasped. "Did you wake me?"
Susan screamed and stumbled back. Jacob froze, staring into the eyes of his daughter, eyes that saw nothing and everything.
The voice was wrong.
Too deep, too all, too cracked by years.
"Emma."
Jacob whispered. "Baby, it's me."
"It's Dad."
The figure in the casket tilted its head slowly.
The mouth moved again. "She let me in," the voice said. "She was tired. Tired like I was." Jacob's throat tightened. "What are you talking about?" The head turned toward him with a slow creak. "So many years alone. No one listened.
No one saw me."
"She saw me."
Susan was on her knees outside the grave, hyperventilating.
"Jacob, this is wrong. This is not natural."
"We have to call someone." Jacob ignored her.
He reached down, his fingers brushing against Emma's hand.
It was cold, but not lifeless. "Emma," he said. "If you can hear me, fight it. You're not alone. I'm here." The mouth opened again. "She's resting."
"I'm here now."
Jacob's jaw clenched.
He refused to believe this was possession. He didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or spirits.
But he did believe in his daughter.
And whatever was happening, he wouldn't leave her alone in a box in the ground.
He looked up at Susan. "Help me get her out."
Susan hesitated, but Jacob's expression left no room for argument. Together, they lifted Emma from the casket and laid her on the grass beside the grave. For a long moment, she was still. Then her chest rose and fell, slowly but steady.
The white faded from her eyes. Her lips quivered. Then finally, her voice came. Weak.
Fragile.
"Dad." Jacob dropped to his knees, cradling her head. "I'm here."
"I've got you. You're okay."
Tears streamed down his face.
Emma's eyes fluttered.
"I had a dream," she whispered. "There was a woman. In purple. She was crying." Jacob held her tighter.
"You're safe now."
But in the back of his mind, the voice still echoed.
"She let me in."
And somewhere in the woods, the trees swayed gently in a wind that had not yet arrived. Jacob held his daughter in his arms as the first light of morning cut through the pine trees, washing the cemetery in a pale golden hue. Emma's breath came in shallow, ragged intervals, her skin clammy and cold, her eyes half-lidded.
She was alive, but something wasn't right.
Something lingered in the space between them, a presence, a shadow of what had just been.
Susan knelt beside them, trembling and dirt-streaked.
She stared at Emma as if she were seeing a ghost and didn't know whether to pray or scream. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper.
"We have to get her to a hospital. Right now." Jacob nodded. "Help me get her in the truck."
The ride back to town was silent. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness in the back seat, her head resting against a pile of blankets. Her lips moved occasionally, but no words came out.
Once, she let out a soft moan, the sound curling in Jacob's chest like a blade.
He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. They pulled into the emergency entrance of Eldergrove General, just after 7. The attending nurse took one look at Emma's pallor and unresponsive state and called for immediate intake. In minutes, she was surrounded by doctors, wheeled away down a fluorescent corridor that swallowed her whole. Jacob and Susan sat in the waiting room, both still covered in dirt, their hands shaking. No one asked why a recently buried girl was now lying in their ER. No one asked why her father looked like he had just crawled out of a grave. Maybe no one wanted to know.
A doctor came out after what felt like an eternity. She was young, sharp-eyed, and careful with her words. "She's stable," she said. "Weak, dehydrated, but she's alive. We've run initial tests. Her heart is functioning, though her body's in an extremely fragile state. There are signs of suppressed metabolic activity, almost like a deep hypothermic coma. We're still investigating." Jacob stood there, stunned. "Is she conscious?" "Not fully," the doctor replied. "But she's responding to stimuli. She may regain full awareness soon." "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated. Briefly. Emma lay in a private ICU room, surrounded by quiet beeping machines and a soft oxygen hiss. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, but her chest rose and fell. Jacob took her hand again, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "I'm here," he said softly. "I never stopped looking."
You promised you des biomes before dîner.
And I kept waiting.
He didn't know how long he sat there, talking in hushed tones, telling her stories about her childhood, about her mother, about the time she learned to ride a bike and screamed until she realized she wasn't falling. When Susan joined him, she looked like she'd aged 10 years in a night. She didn't speak, just sat beside him, occasionally glancing at Emma as though still doubting her own memory. After a while, she reached into her bag and handed Jacob something, a folded piece of paper, slightly crumpled and worn. "This was in her coat pocket," she said. "I found it when we laid her down at the cemetery. I didn't read it then." Jacob opened the letter slowly, his fingers shaking. The handwriting was unmistakable. Emma's. "Dad. I don't know how to say this out loud, and I know I probably should have tried harder. But I need to say it somehow, even if I'm not there when you read it.
Un petit raid, Dad.
I'm tired in a way I don't have words for. Every day feels like I'm holding my breath, waiting to be told I'm not enough.
I know you love me.
I know you want the best for me. But sometimes it feels like I'm not really me anymore. I'm just someone you built out of your hopes and regrets. A project.
A symbole.
And I'm scared I'm going to break under the weight of it.
Please don't be angry. Please don't blame yourself.
I just want to sleep for a while. I just want the noise to stop. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I love you, Emma.
The paper shook in Jacob's sang.
His vision blurred. He pressed the letter to his chest and let out a sound that was neither a sob nor a scream, but something more ancient. More primal. Susan put a hand on his back, but he barely noticed. For all the words he had spoken to Emma in her life, for all the bedtime stories, encouragements, lectures and advice, he had missed the most important ones.
Are you okay?
Do you feel safe?
Can I take something off your shoulder?
He had told her she was strong, that she was capable, that she had to succeed, had to aim high, had to carry forward everything he'd lost and sacrificed. But he had never told her it was okay to rest.
Okay to be scared. Okay to be ordinary.
The realization carved through him like glass. Later that evening, a nurse came in and handed Jacob a small plastic bag with Emma's personal items, her phone, a ring of keys, a few crumpled bills. And her sketchbook. He opened it slowly, flipping through pages of charcoal drawings, scenes from their home, the park bench at Maplewood, an old woman in a long dress standing beneath a tree. One drawing made him stop cold. It was a self-portrait. Emma, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by walls that seemed to close in around her. Her mouth was a thin line, her eyes hollow. In the corner, a small scrawled phrase. Sometimes it feels like I'm being buried alive. Jacob closed the book, pressing it to his forehead. He had been too busy trying to protect her from the world to realize she was drowning right in front of him. And the worst part? She had tried to tell him. Not in words, but in drawings, in quiet sighs, in the silences between their conversations. She had screamed, and he had heard only whispers.
Now, a machine beeped and this doctor lay between two worlds. One foot in the light, one stick cocked in shadow. Jacob made a promise.
He would not fail her again. Not as a protector. Not as a father. And not as someone who should have listened when it mattered most.
Jacob barely left the hospital room for 2 days.
He slept in the stiff-backed chair beside Emma's bed, his neck bent at strange angles, his hands never straying far from hers. Nurses came and went, monitoring her vitals, adjusting her whispering among themselves with a strange mixture of awe and uncertainty.
No one said what they were all thinking, that a girl who had been buried for 4 days wasn't supposed to be alive.
The official reports were vague.
The attending doctor mentioned something about a misdiagnosed coma, a rare metabolic condition, and low-level oxygen preservation.
But every explanation came with a tinge of disbelief.
No one could explain the strange white film that had briefly covered Emma's eyes, or the bizarre audio Jacob had recorded the night before he unearthed her.
They dismissed the footage as interference, feedback, atmospheric anomalies. Jacob didn't argue.
He had already learned there were some truths too large to force into science.
But that didn't stop him from wanting answers.
On the third morning, a sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blind, Emma stirred.
It was small, just a twitch of her fingers, but Jacob was already alert. He leaned forward, holding his breath. Her eyes fluttered open, still rimmed with exhaustion but undeniably hers. "Dad?" she croaked. "I'm here," he whispered, reaching for a cup of ice water.
"You're okay."
She took a sip, then looked around the room in slow confusion. Her voice was weak, but steady. "Am I in the hospital?" "Yes. But you're safe now." She frowned.
"I had the weirdest dream."
Jacob stiffened.
"What kind of dream?"
Emma closed her eyes, brows furrowing. "I was in this old house. It was dark."
"Dusty." I could hear someone crying. "A woman."
She was wearing purple, like an old velvet dress. She kept saying, "They forgot me. They buried me like trash." Jacob felt a chill run through him. "She touched my hand," Emma continued, barely above a whisper. "She said she'd been waiting for someone to listen." Jacob swallowed hard. "Did she say her name?" Emma opened her eyes again. "I think she said Marjorie." Jacob's stomach turned. That name hadn't come from Emma. It had come from the voice in the casket. He stood, paced once, then sat again. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "But only when you're ready." Emma gave him a small nod. "Okay. Not now."
That afternoon, while she rested, Jacob drove back to the cemetery.
The grave was still open.
The casket had been removed for medical investigation, the soil fenced off, a wooden board placed over the pit. He wandered among the headstones, letting the silence settle over him.
The air was still, the scent of pine sharp in his nose.
He found the caretaker, an elderly man named Earl, leaning on a rake beside the maintenance shed.
"Hey, I was wondering if there was ever a woman named Marjorie buried here," Jacob asked. Earl scratched his head.
"Marjorie Whitmore."
Jacob's eyes sharpened. "Yes." Earl nodded slowly. "Lived here back in the 70s. Schoolteacher, I think. Quiet lady. Disappeared one winter. Never found her body. She had no family, far as I recall." "Where was her plot?" Earl looked around, then pointed vaguely. "Somewhere near Section C. A lot of those old graves are unmarked now."
"The rain and moss wore the stones down."
Jacob felt a slow, cold realization settle in. He had buried Emma, however briefly, in the same section where Marjorie's body was supposed to be.
The same ground.
The same space. Was it coincidence? Or something else? He left the cemetery with more questions than answers.
That evening, back at the house, he sat in his workshop and reviewed the footage from the camera once more.
The breathing was still there, unmistakable. But now, he noticed something else.
Just before the moment Emma's eyes opened, there was a whisper.
Barely audible.
He looped the sound, isolated it, boosted the volume.
"I see you," it said. The voice was old. Worn. Female. He leaned back, chills crawling up his spine.
Later that night, Susan joined him in the garage.
"She told me she saw someone in a dream," Jacob said without turning. "A woman. Named Marjorie." Susan frowned. "The same name." She described her dress. "Purple. Velvet. Same as I heard in the voice." Susan sank into the chair across from him. "Do you think she possessed Emma?" Jacob shook his head slowly.
"No.
Not possessed. I think she was waiting for someone to hear her. Emma was vulnerable, emotionally and physically. Maybe that opens some kind of door." Susan crossed her arms. "You're talking like this is normal. Like any of this makes sense." Jacob gave her a tired smile. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be real. She sighed, rubbing her eyes. So what now? Ghost hunting?
No.
But I need to know who Marjorie was. What happened to her? Maybe that's how we help Emma. Maybe the reason she came back is tied to whatever that woman wanted. Susan considered this. You're serious. I've never been more serious.
They spent the next several hours digging through public records, newspaper archives, old town documents.
It was slow work, but by midnight, they had a timeline. Marjorie Whitmore, age 52, elementary school teacher, reported missing in 1978. Last seen walking home from the annual autumn fair. A storm had rolled in that evening. She never arrived home.
No suspects.
No body. Presumed dead. Her house was auctioned off 5 years later. No known relatives. A cold case. Forgotten by everyone, except it seemed, by Marjorie herself. Jacob leaned over the old article, tracing his finger across the grainy black and white photo of her. The face was kind, round, with a solemn mouth and heavy eyes. Emma had drawn those eyes. He remembered the sketch in her notebook. She's been down there all this time, Jacob murmured. Alone. Unheard. Susan looked at him. You think helping her will help Emma? I don't know, Jacob admitted. But I think Emma was chosen for a reason. And if we don't figure out why, we might not get her back completely. That night, as the wind picked up and branches tapped against the windows like restless fingers, Jacob sat beside his daughter's bed again. Her breathing was steadier now. Her color returning. But in her sleep, she murmured, I hear her. Jacob gripped her hand tighter. Then we'll listen, he said softly. Together. The next morning, Jacob woke with a weight in his chest that felt more like a responsibility than fear. Emma was still asleep, her breathing steady, her vitals stable. But something about her rest was unnatural, too still, too deep. She didn't toss, shift, or dream in the usual way. She lay perfectly straight, as if still in the casket. And each time he reached out to touch her hand or brush her hair, a coldness remained, like a boundary he couldn't quite cross. Jacob tried not to let it get to him, but the unease grew heavier with each passing hour. At the hospital cafeteria, Susan slid into the seat across from him with a fresh cup of coffee and a quiet look. You've been up all night again. Jacob didn't answer. He stared into the black swirl of his drink. She's alive, Susan said gently. That's the miracle we prayed for. Jacob nodded. Yes, she's alive. But she's not back. Susan hesitated. You think that woman Marjorie is still with her? I don't know. But it doesn't feel like it's over. Jacob opened Emma's sketchbook, which he'd brought with him everywhere since the hospital. He flipped past drawings of trees and classrooms and people he recognized from their neighborhood. Then he stopped at one particular page. The same woman in the purple dress appeared again, but this time, she wasn't standing beneath a tree. She was staring out from a window, her eyes hollow, her hand pressed to the glass. Beneath the drawing was a note scrawled in faint pencil. She's still here. Jacob swallowed. She's not finished. Susan leaned forward. You think Marjorie's trying to say something through Emma? I think Marjorie wants to be heard, Jacob replied. And I think Emma's the only one who listened. But why Emma? Jacob looked at the sketch again, then closed the book. Because Emma knows what it feels like to be invisible. That afternoon, Jacob returned to Crescent Pines Cemetery, this time with permission from the groundskeeper. Earl met him near Section C, where the unmarked and older graves rested beneath heavy moss and roots. The wind stirred the tall grass as Earl pointed to a spot near a collapsing angel statue. Right around here, he said. This is where Marjorie's original marker used to be. But the grave was never confirmed. The records are a mess. Back then, a lot of things weren't written down the way they should have been. Jacob stepped forward and knelt in the grass. This is where we buried Emma. It lines up almost exactly. Earl scratched the back of his neck. So you think she came back because of this spot? I think this is where the veil is thin, Jacob murmured. The phrase sounded strange coming out of his mouth, but no less true. That night, Jacob sat at Emma's bedside again. Her eyes fluttered once but didn't open.
He pulled out the sketchbook, placed it gently on her lap, and whispered, "If you're still in there, show me.
Draw something. Give me a sign."
He didn't expect a response. But at midnight, when he returned from the hallway to refill his water, he found the sketchbook open.
A new drawing had appeared. It was rough and dark, clearly done quickly, the pencil lines jagged. It showed a door half open, with light pouring out from behind it. And in the foreground, a figure stood facing it. A girl. Emma.
Jacob stared at the drawing for a long time. "She's trying to find her way out," he whispered. The next day, Jacob and Susan drove out to the Eldergrove Historical Society. It was a small brick building at the edge of town, lined with dusty file cabinets and black and white photographs of forgotten faces. A middle-aged volunteer named Diana greeted them at the front desk.
"Marjorie Whitmore," she repeated, tapping her keyboard. "You're not the first to ask." Jacob looked up. "Really?" She nodded.
A local podcaster came by a few years back. He was doing a series on missing people from small towns. Marjorie's case came up because of how odd it was: no body, no suspects, and no follow-up.
Just vanished. "Did he find anything?" Diana shrugged. "Not much."
But there was a rumor, back in the 1980s, that she was buried by mistake. That maybe the search teams never looked far enough. Her house was near the edge of town. There were reports that she'd been seen wandering in the woods before she disappeared.
Jacob leaned in. "Is the house still there?" Diana tapped a few keys. "Barely.
Foreclosed, condemned, scheduled for demolition. The property is under county control.
I can get you the address."
They drove out that evening. The house sat crookedly on its foundation, half swallowed by ivy and weeds. The front porch sagged, the windows cracked. Jacob pushed the door open with a groan of old hinges and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and mold. Susan hesitated at the threshold, then followed.
Inside, the place was a time capsule.
Yellowed wallpaper peeled at the corners. Furniture sat where it had likely remained untouched for decades. In the back room, Jacob found a shelf of books, mostly children's literature, teaching materials, alphabet charts, lesson plans in careful handwriting. "Her classroom followed her home," Susan murmured. Jacob scanned the room and noticed something odd about one of the floorboards. It sat higher than the others.
He knelt and pried it loose.
Inside the narrow space beneath, he found a box wrapped in a rotting cloth.
Inside the box were letters. They were addressed to no one. Unsigned. Unsent.
Dozens of them, each written in a delicate hand.
"I feel like a ghost in my own life. No one remembers my birthday. Not even the children. They'll forget me the second I'm gone."
Jacob read each letter with growing sadness. Every word carried a weight, a quiet grief that had never been spoken aloud.
Marjorie hadn't simply disappeared.
She had faded, lonely, unnoticed, invisible until she truly was gone. "She was already dead before the town knew she was missing," Jacob said softly.
Susan touched his arm. "That's why she reached for Emma. She saw herself."
Jacob stood in the middle of the dusty room and looked around.
"She doesn't want revenge," he said. "She wants someone to remember."
Back at the hospital, Emma had stirred again. The nurses said she'd spoken a word, just one.
"Home."
When Jacob returned, he sat beside her bed, placed the box of letters on the table, and whispered, "We found her house.
We found her words. You helped us hear them."
Emma's fingers moved slightly. And for the first time since they had pulled her from the grave, her lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. Emma's recovery moved slowly, but steadily. She spoke little, slept often, and seemed confused by gaps in her memory. Sometimes she asked strange questions, about days that hadn't happened, people she had never met, and dreams that blurred the line between imagination and memory. But her color returned, her eyes grew clearer, and the tension in her limbs began to ease. Most importantly, she was herself again, or at least mostly. Jacob stayed by her side, dividing his time between the hospital and his garage workshop, where he reviewed everything they had gathered, the sketchbook, the camera footage, Marjorie's letters. He carried those pages like a sacred text, rereading them each night, memorizing the loneliness between the lines. He hadn't told Emma yet about the letters.
She was still fragile.
He didn't want to burden her with the story of a woman whose sorrow might still linger at the edges of her consciousness. But he could see it in her, she hadn't forgotten. Not entirely. One afternoon, Jacob found her sitting upright in bed, her sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing again. "What are you working on?" he asked gently. Emma didn't look up. Her pencil moved in short, confident strokes. "Her face," she murmured. "I keep seeing it. Even when I close my eyes." Jacob moved closer. The page showed a woman's profile, soft, worn, sad. The eyes were deep set, the mouth downturned. Around her shoulders was a familiar velvet shawl. "She told me her name," Emma added quietly. "Marjorie." Jacob sat beside her, heart pounding. "What else do you remember?" Emma hesitated, then spoke slowly. "I was somewhere dark. Cold, but not painful. She was there with me. Not threatening. Just waiting. I think she didn't want to leave. Not until someone listened." "You listened," Jacob said. Emma nodded. "I think I did. I think I still can." That night, Jacob met again with Susan in the kitchen. They sat in silence for a long time before Jacob finally spoke. "She remembers more than she says. She's carrying pieces of Marjorie with her." Susan looked wary. "Is that safe?" "I don't know. But I think it's necessary." He reached for the letters again, unfolding a particularly fragile one. The ink was faded, the paper brittle. But the words still stung. "I was never anyone's favorite. Not as a teacher, not as a friend. People smiled, but they forgot me before I turned away. I wonder what it would feel like to be remembered." Susan rubbed her temples. "You think telling Emma about these letters will help her?" Jacob nodded. "I think it might help both of them." The next morning, he brought the box to Emma's room. "I want to show you something," he said, placing it gently on her tray table. "We found this under the floor of an abandoned house. It belonged to Marjorie. She used to live just a few miles from here. She was a teacher. Like you, she kept journals. But no one ever read them, until now." Emma opened the box and pulled out one of the letters. As she read, her brow furrowed. "She wrote these?" she asked. "Yes." Emma flipped through a few more, her hands trembling slightly. "She was lonely. She was forgotten," Jacob said. "I think that's what kept her here. That need to be heard." Emma nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand that." She paused, then whispered, "There were times I wanted to disappear too." Jacob reached out and covered her hand with his. "You don't have to carry her pain," he said. "But if you want to help her, I'll stand beside you." Over the next few days, Emma began speaking more openly about her experience. She recalled fragments, sitting in an old wooden chair that wasn't hers, staring out a cracked window, hearing clocks ticking that she couldn't see. There were nights when she felt herself split in two, one part of her sinking deeper into the silence, and another screaming to wake up. In those moments, Marjorie was there. Not malicious. Not angry. Just there. "She never forced me," Emma said. "She didn't take control. It was more like, she needed somewhere to rest. And I gave her space." Jacob struggled to find words. "Why you?" Emma thought for a long moment. "Because I understood what it felt like to scream on the inside and have no one hear it." The doctors began clearing her for discharge. Her body had recovered far faster than expected. The attending physician attributed her resilience to youth and a healthy baseline, but everyone at the hospital moved with a certain reverence around her, as if unsure whether they were treating a patient or a phenomenon. When Emma was finally allowed to return home, she requested one stop first. "I want to see her house," she said. Jacob drove in silence. The road wound through the pine forest, past rusted mailboxes and forgotten trails. The house was still standing, its windows now boarded, the porch rotting at the corners. Jacob parked at the edge of the lot and helped Emma out. She walked slowly, leaning on his arm. They stood in front of the door for a long time. Emma placed a hand against the wood. This was her prison. "It was her refuge once," Jacob replied. "Until it wasn't." Emma turned to him. "Can I go inside?" He hesitated, then nodded. "If you're sure." Inside,
The air was stale and thick with dust.
Emma moved carefully, her eyes scanning every corner like she was seeing echoes no one else could. In the back room, she stopped in front of the shelf where they had found the letters.
She used to teach, Emma said. She gave everything to other people. And when there was nothing left, no one noticed she was empty. Jacob nodded.
That's what happens to people who give too much and are never seen. Emma sat in the same chair Jacob had pulled from the corner days before. She placed her palms flat on the arms and closed her eyes.
I can still feel her. Does it hurt? Emma shook her head.
No.
It feels quiet, like something ending, but gently. Jacob crouched beside her. Do you think she's still here? Emma opened her eyes slowly.
No.
I think she's leaving. Because someone finally remembered.
They sat there in silence as dust swirled in the light streaming through the cracks. Before they left, Emma pulled a pencil from her bag and began to write on a torn page from her sketchbook. She placed the note on the mantel and weighted it with a stone. When Jacob asked what she wrote, she answered simply, I told her she mattered. As they stepped outside, the wind moved through the trees with a softness neither of them had felt before. And for the first time since Emma had returned, the air didn't feel heavy.
It felt light. Almost clean.
Emma's return home brought a sense of comfort Jacob hadn't felt in weeks, but it was comfort draped in silence. She was no longer the pale, breathless girl pulled from the grave, but she wasn't the same girl who had made toast on the morning of her disappearance either. She moved through the house like a ghost of herself, calm, careful, observant. Every movement was deliberate, every word considered. She ate in small bites, slept with the light on, and kept her sketchbook close.
Jacob didn't press her. Not yet. He waited for her to come to him.
One evening, just after sunset, she did. They sat on the porch swing, the wood creaking beneath them, the night air cool against their skin.
Fireflies blinked in the yard.
The distant sound of a dog barking echoed from down the road. Emma clutched her sketchbook in her lap, her fingers curled tightly around its spine.
She's gone, she said softly. Jacob turned toward her, eyes cautious. Marjorie. Emma nodded. She left the night we visited her house. I felt it. Like something lifted off my chest.
Jacob exhaled slowly.
I'm glad.
That she found peace. And that you did too.
Emma didn't speak for a moment. Then she opened the sketchbook and handed it to him. On the newest page was a drawing, of herself, standing in the middle of a field, her arms raised toward the sky. Behind her, in faint outline, stood the figure of Marjorie, distant but peaceful. The trees around them were drawn in fluid motion, bending slightly, as if bowing.
I think we helped her, Emma said. Jacob looked at the drawing for a long time. I think we did too.
But even as he said it, a seed of unease lingered inside him. Because for all that Marjorie's presence had faded, the questions hadn't. How had Emma survived being buried alive for 4 days? How had she come back from the edge of death without permanent damage? And why had Marjorie chosen her? Jacob knew grief could twist reality. He knew belief was a strange thing, it could comfort, confuse, or blind. And he had begun to wonder, was this experience spiritual?
Supernatural? Psychological?
He didn't want to assume answers, but the weight of uncertainty gnawed at him.
He needed perspective.
That's why, 3 days later, he drove up the winding road to the old chapel near Haven Creek, a hillside church with peeling paint and ivy-choked walls. He wasn't particularly religious, but he'd heard of Reverend Nathaniel Park, an ordained pastor with a background in abnormal psychology and end-of-life care. People in Elder Grove spoke of him with a curious mix of reverence and suspicion. They called him the soul listener. Jacob found him tending a vegetable patch behind the church, wearing a faded denim jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. He looked more like a retired farmer than a spiritual guide. I heard you help people with strange questions, Jacob said as he approached. Nathaniel glanced up and smiled faintly.
I help people with unanswered ones.
They talked over tea in the chapel's back office, a quiet space filled with books and sunlight filtering through stained glass. Jacob told him everything, Emma's collapse, the mistaken burial, the camera, the voice, Marjorie, the letters and finally, Emma's return.
He left nothing out.
Nathaniel listened without interrupting. When Jacob finished, the Reverend leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. What you've described, he said slowly, sits at the crossroads of medicine, memory, and the metaphysical.
I've read similar accounts. Rare but not unheard of. You believe me? Jacob asked.
I believe something happened, Nathaniel replied. I believe your daughter went somewhere most of us aren't meant to return from. Whether it was a coma, a dissociative state, or something beyond biology, I can't say.
Jacob leaned forward. Do you think Marjorie was real?
Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver.
Do you mean as a ghost? A soul? Or as a memory too powerful to die quietly? Any of it.
Nathaniel considered. Sometimes, grief carves a hollow space inside a person. If two such hollows meet, one living, one dead, they may echo each other.
Call to each other.
That echo can feel like a presence.
And sometimes it becomes one. Jacob nodded slowly. Emma said she didn't feel possessed. She said she made room.
That tracks with many old accounts, Nathaniel said. Voluntary mediumship, if you want a label. A kind of emotional empathy taken to its extreme.
Most cases are short-lived.
But the risk is identity confusion. If someone stays too long in someone else's grief, they begin to forget their own shape. That sent a cold ripple through Jacob's spine.
Is she in danger? Nathaniel shrugged. Hard to say.
She sounds self-aware, resilient. But you'll need to watch her for signs. Detachment, depersonalization, loss of time or memory. Dreams that bleed into waking hours.
She's already had some of that, Jacob admitted. Then you may want to ground her. What does that mean? Bring her fully into her own life.
Let her write, paint, create, anything that forces her to assert self. Keep her connected to her body, her voice, her story. Jacob looked out the stained glass window, where the sky was darkening.
Can I ask you something harder? Nathaniel nodded. If you were me, would you consider this a miracle? Or a warning? The Reverend smiled gently. Sometimes they're the same.
Jacob drove home with the windows down, letting the wind clear his mind. When he walked through the door, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea and reading one of Marjorie's old books.
She looked up and smiled. I think I'm ready to talk, she said.
He sat across from her. There's one thing I haven't told you, she began.
The day I went to the park. I didn't collapse because of an illness. I took something. Jacob froze. What do you mean?
I bought herbal sleeping capsules online. They were supposed to be strong, but safe.
I didn't want to die.
I just wanted everything to stop.
For a little while.
Jacob's hands curled into fists on the table. I didn't know they'd slow my heart that much. I thought I'd just sleep a day, wake up, maybe you'd realize I wasn't okay. He stared at her, words failing him.
I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I just didn't know how else to ask for help.
Jacob reached across the table and took her hand.
I should have seen it.
I was so focused on the path I thought you should walk, I didn't see you struggling to stand.
Tears welled in Emma's eyes. But I came back.
Because someone, wouldn't let me go. Jacob didn't ask whether she meant Marjorie or herself.
He didn't need to.
Instead he said, then let's figure out where you go next.
Together. Emma smiled. I'd like that.
And for the first time, Jacob felt something shift, not just in her, but in himself. A door, once sealed by silence and expectation, had opened. Now it was time to walk through it. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, golden and warm, casting long shadows across the counter where Emma sat sketching. Her eyes were steady now, less haunted. But her movements still carried the softness of someone recently unburdened, like a bird flying with wings still sore from the cage. Jacob stood by the stove, scrambling eggs and trying to ignore the nervous flutter in his chest.
It had been a week since she came home.
A week since she told him about the capsules. A week since she admitted what he had feared most, that her collapse hadn't been random. That it hadn't been fate or illness or accident.
It had been a cry. A acte of départ.
He didn't blame her. He blamed himself. He had read the signs backward, mistaking silence for strength, perfection for peace. And now, he was trying to rewrite every rule he'd lived by as a father. I found something else, he said, breaking the silence.
Emma looked up.
Jacob set a small, clear evidence bag on the table. Inside was a folded note, yellowed at the edges.
I didn't show you before, he said. I found it in your coat pocket.
The day we bury you.
Emma stared at the note for a moment, her fingers hovering over the bag. Then slowly, she opened it and unfolded the page. Her own handwriting stared back at her.
Dad.
I don't know how to say this out loud, and I know I probably should have tried harder. But I need to say it somehow, even if I'm not there when you read it.
I'm tired, Dad.
I'm tired in a way I don't have words for.
Every day feels like I'm holding my breath, waiting to be told I'm not enough.
I know you love me.
I know you want the best for me.
But sometimes it feels like I'm not really me anymore. I'm just someone you built out of your hopes and regrets.
A project.
A symbole.
And I'm scared I'm going to break under the weight of it.
Please don't be angry. Please don't blame yourself.
I just want to sleep for a while. I just want the noise to stop. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I love you, Emma.
Emma folded the letter again with shaking hands.
She didn't cry.
She just stared at the table, her expression unreadable.
I wrote that the night before, she said quietly. I was sitting at the park.
I remember the wind felt warm.
There were kids laughing nearby, but it sounded far away.
Jacob sat across from her. I didn't know you felt that way, he said.
I saw you working so hard, keeping everything together.
I thought that meant you were okay. I tried to be, she said.
But every time I got a grade, it felt like proof I deserved to be loved. And every time I slipped even a little, it felt like I might lose you.
Jacob's throat tightened. You never had to earn my love. I know, she said, but I didn't feel it.
That admission hung in the air between them, heavy, raw, honest.
Jacob reached across the table and took her hand. You were never a project, he said.
You were always the reason I got out of bed. The reason I tried to be better. I didn't know how to show it in a way that didn't scare you.
Emma smiled faintly.
You showed it in the way you packed my lunch, fixed my bike, stayed up with me when I was sick. But I think we both forgot that love has to be spoken too. They sat there for a while, the weight of unspoken years finally beginning to dissolve. Later that day, Emma asked if they could visit Maplewood Park. Jacob hesitated, remembering the place where it had all begun, or unraveled.
But she insisted.
I want to go back there as myself, she said.
Not as the girl who tried to disappear.
The sun was low when they arrived, casting long amber rays across the grass. The park was quiet, the sound of wind through the leaves steady and calming. They walked the familiar path until they reached the bench where Emma had last sat. She lowered herself slowly, running her hand over the wood.
I came here because it felt safe, she said. Not because I wanted to die. I think that's important to say.
Jacob nodded, sitting beside her.
I wasn't trying to punish you, or escape forever.
I just needed everything to stop for a little while.
The pressure. The noise.
The pretending.
And Marjorie found you, Jacob said. She did, Emma agreed. But she didn't pull me under. She didn't want to trap me. She just needed company.
Someone who knew how it felt to be forgotten. They sat in silence as the wind picked up slightly, the trees swaying in time.
Do you remember what she said to you? Jacob asked. Emma turned to him, thoughtful. Yes. She said, you don't have to die to be loved. And then she showed me the door. Jacob frowned. What door?
In the dream.
It was like I was inside her house, but darker.
Colder.
And there was this wooden door that led outside.
It was glowing. She pointed to it. Said it was mine if I wanted it.
And you walked through.
Emma smiled. Eventually. It took a while. I think I was afraid to come back. I didn't know what would be waiting for me. Jacob's eyes softened. I was waiting. I know that now, she said.
Before they left the park, Emma pulled out her sketchbook and drew the bench, the trees, and a faint figure in the distance wearing a velvet shawl.
Not detailed, just a suggestion, a memory. She doesn't need to be remembered with stone or statues, she said. But I won't forget her. Jacob nodded. Neither will I.
That night, back at home, Emma pinned the drawing to her wall.
just above her desk. Beside it, she taped the letter she'd written, the one meant to say goodbye. "It's not a suicide note anymore," she told Jacob. "It's a turning point." He watched her from the doorway, feeling something shift deep in his chest. Not just relief. Not just hope. Healing.
Réal, honeste et ligne.
And for the first time in his life, he didn't see Emma as a reflection of his fears or ambitions.
He saw her clearly. Not as his project, but as his daughter. Fully herself. Entirely enough.
News of Emma's return spread slowly, cautiously, like a rumor no one wanted to say out loud in case it vanished the moment it was spoken. In a town like Eldergrove, where people talked in whispers at the coffee shop and measured change in inches, not miles, resurrection was not a topic that fit neatly into conversation. But everyone had heard something. By the end of the week, the local paper ran a quiet article buried on page 6, "Teen awakens after 4-day coma mistaken for death." The words were carefully chosen, the tone clinical. There was no mention of the grave, the casket, the burial. No mention of what Jacob had unearthed, literally and metaphorically. But those who had known Emma, who had seen her go under and return, carried the weight of it. Jacob noticed the stares when he went into Langley's for a part. The way Mrs. Dewey from the pharmacy paused mid-sentence when he walked by. The strange mixture of reverence and discomfort in the eyes of the townsfolk. He wasn't angry. He understood. They were trying to make sense of a story that didn't fit the world they lived in. And truth be told, he still hadn't made sense of it either. One afternoon, Emma asked if they could visit the library. Not the school library, she hadn't gone back to school yet, and wasn't sure when or if she would, but the old public one on Chestnut Street, the kind with creaky floors, sun-faded rugs, and that smell of old pages and dust that never quite left your clothes. Jacob drove her there and waited in the car while she went inside. She returned 20 minutes later, holding a thin, cloth-bound book. It had no title on the cover. She handed it to Jacob. "I asked the librarian if there was anything about Marjorie Whitmore," she said. She didn't find much, but this was in a box of old teacher records. Jacob opened the book carefully. It was a personal journal, dated entries, lesson plans, scribbled thoughts in the margins. It was Marjorie's. As they read through it together that evening, Jacob felt like he was hearing her voice again, not as a ghost, but as a woman. The entries were unremarkable on the surface, notes about students, weather, headaches, long walks. But between the lines, there was a growing sense of isolation. "Susan L. didn't show up for tutoring again. I think she's embarrassed to be seen with me. Mr. Lattimore said I dressed too modestly. I didn't think it was his business. I told the principal about the vandalism, but he said it was probably just kids being kids.
Ich lin dit myself."
Emma pointed to one entry near the end. "Sometimes I wonder if I've already died, and no one noticed. Maybe that's what it feels like, just fading slowly, until no one remembers your name." "I think the town forgot her long before she vanished," Emma said quietly. Jacob closed the book. "And now they're forgetting her again." Emma's eyes lifted. "Do they have to?" That question lingered between them, unanswered. The next morning, Jacob and Emma sat at the kitchen table, both staring at the book like it contained a secret neither had yet unlocked. Emma reached for her sketchbook. "I have an idea," she said. Over the next few days, she worked on it. Pencils scattered across her desk, pages torn, redrawn, painted. She didn't explain, not right away. Jacob didn't push. She had a look in her eyes, focused, urgent, alive. A fire he hadn't seen in her in months. When she finally showed him, he understood. It was a mural design. A simple one. A wall-sized depiction of a woman standing beneath a tree, the same sugar maple from Maplewood Park. Around her, children held books and flowers. The woman's face was drawn softly, with lines of both sorrow and kindness. Behind her the words, "To be remembered is to be seen." "I want to paint it on the side of the library," Emma said. "Where the playground used to be. There's a blank wall there." Jacob nodded slowly. "Do you want me to talk to the council?" "No," she said. "I want to do it myself." It took a few more weeks. First, she brought the design to the library director. Then to the town council. Then to the art committee at the high school, who offered supplies and volunteers. People were hesitant at first.
No one said no, but no one said yes quickly either. It was the kind of request that made people uncomfortable. A mural for a forgotten teacher tied to a girl who'd been buried and come back? Too much. Too strange. But then something happened. An older woman, Mrs. Halvorsen, who had taught at the school in the 80s, stood up at the meeting and said, "I remember Marjorie. She gave me a coat when I was new and too proud to ask for one. She was kind." And then a man named Ron, who had once been one of her students, added, "She taught me how to read. I used to get picked on, but she stayed after class for me every day." The council approved the mural unanimously. Jacob stood back and watched as Emma organized the painting day. Teens, parents, volunteers, all brushing strokes of color onto the wall. It wasn't perfect. The lines weren't crisp, the paint sometimes ran, and some volunteers wandered off halfway through. But it was real. Alive. When it was finished, they held a small gathering. Nothing grand.
Nos pichis.
Just a few folding chairs, paper cups of lemonade, and quiet music from a portable speaker. Emma stood beneath the finished mural, looking up at the woman beneath the maple tree. "She matters now," she said. Jacob stood beside her. "She always did." Emma looked at him. "So do I." He smiled. "You always have." She reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in ribbon, a small wooden box. She handed it to him. He opened it to find the camera. The same one he had hidden in her grave. She had cleaned it, repaired the casing, rewired the connectors. On the inside flap was a handwritten note. "Thank you for believing I'd come back." Jacob stared at it for a long time. "I thought I was doing it for you," he said. "But maybe I was doing it for both of us." Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. They stood there, side by side, as the mural dried in the afternoon sun. A tribute not just to a woman long forgotten, but to a girl who refused to disappear. And a father who finally learned how to see. Summer in Eldergrove faded gently, like a breath held and slowly released. The trees began their quiet shift from green to gold, the wind picked up in the mornings, and the once-long evenings drew shorter. The mural outside the library had settled into the townscape, no longer an object of murmured speculation, but a part of daily life. Children pointed to it. Old residents paused as they passed. And for some, it sparked memories of a woman they hadn't realized they'd forgotten. Jacob often found himself sitting on the bench near the wall in the early hours before work. He'd bring a thermos of coffee, rest his elbows on his knees, and watch the colors catch the light. It wasn't just a painting, it was a monument to what had once been buried, to what had come back, and to what still lived. Emma had begun to rebuild her life, not quickly, and not always smoothly. She still had days when her energy vanished, when the pressure of expectation crept in uninvited. She'd chosen not to return to school that semester, opting instead for time to heal, to create, to figure out what her life looked like without other people drawing the map. One Friday morning, she knocked softly on Jacob's workshop door. He looked up from a circuit board, surprised but glad. "Hey, kiddo." Emma smiled. "Got a minute?" "Always." She stepped inside, carrying a folder. Her shoulders were straighter now. Her eyes clearer. The girl who had whispered from the edge of death was no longer standing in the doorway. This was someone new. Someone still learning how to live, but no longer afraid to try. "I've been writing," she said. "A lot, actually. And sketching. And thinking. About what happened. About Marjorie. About me." Jacob nodded slowly. "And?" She handed him the folder. Inside were pages, typed, carefully formatted, some with pencil illustrations in the margins. A title across the front, The Whisper in the Casket, a memoir of silence, memory, and coming back. Jacob turned the pages in awe. "I think other people need to hear it," Emma said. "Not just about what happened to me, but about what it felt like to be invisible. To scream on the inside and be praised on the outside." He looked up, emotion rising in his chest. "You want to publish it?" "I think so," she said. "Or maybe read parts of it aloud. Start a group. Something. I don't want to bury it again." Jacob stood and walked around the desk to pull her into a hug. It wasn't rushed or tight. It was quiet, like a breath finally being let go. "I'm proud of you," he whispered.
Not because of the words, but because you're still writing them. That evening, they drove out to Crescent Pines together. The grass had grown high again, and the old section of the cemetery was quieter than ever. Emma carried a small stone in her pocket, etched with the name Marjorie Whitmore, the date of her disappearance, and beneath it, a simple line, "You were seen." They found the spot where Emma's grave had once been, now leveled and covered in grass, and just a few paces away, they placed the stone near the collapsed angel statue. "I thought this was where everything ended," Emma said. Jacob glanced at her. "But now I think this was where I began again," she continued. They stood in silence, letting the wind move around them. There was no chill in the air, just a soft calm. A peace earned, not given. As they walked back to the car, Emma paused. "Do you ever wonder if she was real?" she asked. Jacob didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the sky, the fading daylight brushing the horizon with color. "I used to," he said. "But now I think it doesn't matter." Emma tilted her head. "Why?" "Because whether she was a ghost or a memory, or just part of you, she saved us. And she reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That love isn't about building someone in your image. It's about learning to see them in theirs." Emma smiled. In the following months, she kept writing. She joined a local youth group focused on mental health advocacy. She spoke, quietly at first, then with more confidence. Not about the supernatural, not about resurrection, but about depression, silence, perfectionism, and how dangerous it is to measure your worth only in achievements. Her story rippled outward. Teens who had once admired her from a distance now asked her real questions. Some cried. Some stayed after meetings to talk. And Jacob, watching from the back of those rooms, felt something heal inside him each time he saw a face light up in recognition. One evening in late October, Emma was invited to speak at the town's community center. It wasn't a large crowd, maybe 40 people, but it included parents, teachers, students, even the mayor. Jacob stood off to the side, near the mural design she'd printed and taped to the wall. Emma stepped up to the microphone. "When I was younger," she began, "I thought success was love. That being perfect meant I deserved to be seen. But I've learned that love isn't conditional. And that sometimes, the people who smile the brightest are the ones who are silently drowning." She paused. "I once disappeared. Not just physically. Emotionally. I vanished behind grades and politeness and pressure. And I almost didn't come back." Jacob swallowed hard. "But I did come back," Emma said. "Because someone was willing to listen. Not fix. Not push.
Just listen."
Her eyes scanned the room. "And now I want to listen too." When she stepped down, the applause was quiet but heartfelt. People didn't cheer. They stood. Slowly, respectfully. Like standing at a memorial. Or the beginning of something new.
That night, Jacob and Emma walked au main d'heure, a sky full of stars.
"Do you think she'd be proud?" Emma asked. "Of who?" Jacob replied.
Marjorie.
He smiled. "I think she already was." They stopped outside their house. The porch light glowed gently. Jacob turned to her. "Emma." "Yeah." "You don't have to be anyone but yourself anymore." She looked up at him, her eyes steady and full of light. "I know," she said. "And that's enough." They stepped inside. The door closed behind them.
And the night, for once, held no shadow, only star.